700 feet above the deck of USS Essex, November 4th, 1944, 14:37 hours local time. Ensign Robert Walsh is flying a Vought F-4U Corsair at 112 miles per hour when his arresting hook fails to catch any of the 9 arresting wires stretched across the carrier deck. The Corsair touches down, bounces, touches again, and continues rolling. The hook drags across the deck, skipping over each wire. Walsh has 3 seconds to make a decision. Ahead of him, parked at the forward end of the flight deck, are 15 aircraft, Hellcats, Avengers, and 3 more Corsairs. Men are working around these aircraft. If Walsh's Corsair reaches them at 80 miles per hour, everyone dies. He does not have enough deck remaining to stop. He does not have enough airspeed to go around. The throttle is already at idle. The brakes are already applied. The aircraft is not stopping fast enough. Physics is unforgiving. A 4-ton fighter moving at 80 miles per hour carries momentum that cannot be dissipated in 300 feet of deck space. The mathematics are clear. Walsh is going to hit the parked aircraft. The only question is, how hard? If you appreciate these detailed accounts of aviation history, please consider hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. And in the comments below, let us know where you're listening from. Now let's understand why this mission mattered. The strategic context in November of 1944 centers on the Philippines. The United States has returned to the islands after 2.5 years of Japanese occupation. The invasion of Leyte began on October 20th. The naval battle of Leyte Gulf, fought from October 23rd to 26th, resulted in the effective destruction of the Japanese combined fleet as an offensive force. But the fighting continues. Japanese aircraft still operate from bases throughout the Philippines and Formosa. American carriers provide air cover for the invasion forces and strike Japanese airfields, supply lines, and troop concentrations. USS Essex is a fleet carrier, the lead ship of her class. She displaces 27,000 tons. Her flight deck is 872 feet long and 147 feet wide. She carries an air group of 91 aircraft, 36 Hellcat fighters, 36 Helldiver dive bombers, and 18 Avenger torpedo bombers. In November of 1944, the air group also includes a detachment of 4 Corsairs assigned for evaluation. The Corsair is faster than the Hellcat and carries more ordnance, but it has a reputation for difficult carrier operations. The detachment is testing whether the Corsair can be integrated into carrier air groups on a routine basis. The Corsair's difficulties stem from its design. The engine is a Pratt & Whitney R2800 Double Wasp, an 18-cylinder radial producing 2,000 horsepower. To accommodate a propeller large enough to absorb this power without exceeding supersonic tip speeds, the propeller diameter is 13 feet 4 inches. This requires long landing gear to provide ground clearance. Long landing gear is structurally weak and prone to collapse. To solve this problem, Vought designed the wing with an inverted gull configuration, lowering the wing roots and shortening the required gear length. This solution works on land. On carriers, it creates new problems. The inverted gull wing places the cockpit 14 feet above the ground and far aft of the engine. Visibility over the long nose during landing approach is poor. Carrier landings require the pilot to see the landing signal officer, who stands on a platform at the aft port corner of the flight deck and signals corrections with colored paddles. If the pilot cannot see the LSO clearly, he cannot make corrections. If he cannot make corrections, he does not land safely. The Corsair's poor forward visibility makes LSO signals difficult to interpret. Pilots compensate by approaching in a turn, keeping the LSO in sight until the last moment, then straightening out just before touchdown. This technique works when executed correctly. When executed incorrectly, it results in landing accidents. The second problem is the landing gear. The Corsair's main gear oleo struts are stiff. When the aircraft touches down on a carrier deck, the stiff oleos do not absorb the impact smoothly. The aircraft bounces. A bounce on a carrier deck is dangerous because the deck is short. Each bounce consumes deck space. After 3 bounces, the aircraft is out of deck. The pilot must either catch a wire on the next touchdown or go around for another approach. Going around requires immediate application of full power. If the engine does not respond immediately, and radial engines sometimes hesitate when the throttle is advanced abruptly, the aircraft settles back onto the deck without enough speed to fly. This is called a stall on the deck. It is usually fatal. The third problem is the arresting hook. The Corsair's hook is attached to the tail wheel assembly. When the tail wheel strut compresses during touchdown, the hook point rises slightly. If the hook rises at the moment it should engage a wire, it skips over the wire. The pilot feels the skip as a slight jolt. By the time he realizes the hook has not caught, he is already halfway down the deck. The Navy has investigated this problem and issued technical bulletins recommending modifications to the hook attachment. Not all Corsairs have been modified. These problems are not theoretical. Between February and October of 1944, carrier-based Corsairs experienced a landing accident rate of 14%. This means that 1 landing in 7 results in damage to the aircraft or injury to the pilot. The accident rate for Hellcats during the same period is 3%. The Navy is reluctant to deploy Corsairs widely to carriers until the accident rate decreases. The detachment aboard Essex is part of the effort to identify solutions. USS Essex is operating as part of Task Group 38-3, one of 4 fast carrier task groups supporting operations in the Philippines. The group includes 3 fleet carriers, Essex, Lexington, and Ticonderoga, and 2 light carriers, Langley and Princeton. The carriers are escorted by battleships, cruisers, and destroyers. The entire task group maneuvers together, maintaining a defensive formation that provides overlapping anti-aircraft coverage. The carriers launch and recover aircraft in coordinated cycles. Each carrier operates independently during flight operations, but maintains position within the task group formation. On November 4th, Essex launches a strike against Japanese airfields on Luzon. The strike consists of 12 Hellcats, 8 Helldivers, and 6 Avengers. The Corsair detachment does not participate in this strike. The Corsairs are being held in reserve for combat air patrol and for evaluation flights. Ensign Walsh is scheduled to fly a familiarization flight, practicing carrier landings without operational tasking. This is standard procedure for pilots transitioning to a new aircraft type. Walsh has flown Hellcats for 8 months. He has 147 carrier landings in the Hellcat. He has 11 carrier landings in the Corsair. Today will be his 12th. Robert Walsh joined the Navy in June of 1942. He was 19 years old and had completed 1 year of college in Ohio. He enlisted because the Navy offered aviation training and because he wanted to fly. The Navy sent him to pre-flight school at the University of Iowa, where he learned navigation, meteorology, and aircraft recognition. He then attended primary flight training at Naval Air Station Ottumwa, flying the N-3N biplane. He soloed after 9 hours of instruction. His instructor noted that Walsh had good coordination and did not overreact to the aircraft's movements. These qualities are essential for carrier pilots. Overreaction leads to oscillation. Oscillation leads to loss of control. He completed primary in December of 1942 and moved to basic flight training at Naval Air Station Corpus Christi. He flew the SNV Vultee Valiant, a low-wing monoplane with retractable gear. The Valiant is faster and less forgiving than the N-3N. Walsh adapted. He learned instrument flying, formation flying, and navigation. In March of 1943, he advanced to carrier qualification training. This phase introduced him to the arrested landing. The technique is counterintuitive. On a normal landing, the pilot reduces power and flares just before touchdown, bleeding off speed to minimize the impact. On a carrier landing, the pilot maintains power through touchdown and only cuts the throttle after the hook catches a wire. This is because if the hook misses all the wires, the pilot must immediately go around. Going around requires full power. If the throttle is already at idle, the engine takes 3 to 4 seconds to spool up. In 3 seconds, the aircraft travels 400 feet. The carrier deck is not 400 feet long after the last wire. Walsh qualified on a training carrier in the Gulf of Mexico. He made 6 successful landings without bolter or wave-off. He was designated a naval aviator in April of 1943 and assigned to the F-15, a fighter squadron equipped with F-6F Hellcats. The squadron deployed aboard USS Essex in May of 1943. Walsh flew his first combat mission on June 1st, a strike against Japanese installations on Marcus Island. He did not encounter enemy aircraft. He returned to the carrier and landed without incident. This established a pattern. Over the next 17 months, Walsh flew 83 combat missions. He was credited with 2 confirmed kills, both during the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June of 1944. He was competent, reliable, and careful. He did not take unnecessary risks. His squadron commander described him as steady. In October of 1944, 4 Corsairs were brought aboard Essex for evaluation. The pilots selected to fly them were chosen based on experience and temperament. Walsh was selected because he had 147 successful carrier landings and because he did not freelance. The transition training consisted of 3 flights, 2 familiarization flights over water, and 1 landing practice session. The landing practice was conducted without ordnance load to keep the aircraft as light as possible. Walsh completed the 3 flights and was cleared for operational evaluation. His first operational landing in the Corsair occurred on October 27th. The landing was successful but required 3 attempts. On the first approach, the LSO waved him off because his altitude was too high. On the second approach, the LSO waved him off because his airspeed was too fast. On the third approach, Walsh caught the number 6 wire and stopped within 400 feet. The LSO's report noted, "Approach unstable, landing adequate." The mission on November 4th begins with a briefing at 1300 hours. Walsh is scheduled for a training flight, launch, fly the pattern, land, repeat. The purpose is to build proficiency in the Corsair landing technique. No ordnance will be carried. Fuel load is 450 gallons, enough for 90 minutes of flight. The aircraft is Bureau number 82311, a F4U-1D variant. The aircraft has 48 hours of flight time since its last maintenance inspection. All systems are reported operational. Walsh walks to the aircraft at 1400 hours. The flight deck is active. Aircraft are being respotted, refueled, and rearmed. The noise is constant, engines starting, propellers turning, tractors towing aircraft, deck crews shouting over the wind. Walsh conducts his pre-flight inspection. Control surfaces are free and correct. Tires are inflated. Fuel caps are secure. Oil level is adequate. He climbs into the cockpit and straps in. The plane captain, an enlisted aviation mechanic responsible for this particular aircraft, stands on the wing and assists with the startup checklist. Walsh starts the engine at 1422 hours. The R-2800 coughs, backfires, and settles into a rough idle. This is normal. Radial engines run rough until they warm up. Walsh monitors the oil pressure and cylinder head temperature. Both are within limits. He signals ready to the flight deck officer. The flight deck officer directs him to taxi to the catapult. Essex is equipped with 2 hydraulic catapults, one on the bow and one on the port side amidships. Walsh is assigned to the bow catapult. The catapult crew attaches the holdback fitting and the catapult bridle. The holdback restrains the aircraft while the engine runs up to full power. The bridle connects the aircraft to the catapult shuttle. When the catapult fires, the shuttle accelerates down the track, pulling the aircraft via the bridle. The acceleration is violent. The Corsair goes from 0 to 90 miles per hour in 70 feet. The force is 4 Gs. Walsh braces himself. The catapult officer signals for full power. Walsh advances the throttle to the stop. The engine roars. The aircraft strains against the holdback. The catapult officer checks that the deck is clear, looks at Walsh, and signals the launch. Walsh salutes. The catapult fires. The acceleration slams Walsh back into his seat. The Corsair hurtles forward. At the end of the catapult stroke, the bridle releases and falls away. The aircraft is flying. Walsh climbs to 800 feet and enters the landing pattern. The pattern is a racetrack shape flown to the port side of the carrier. The downwind leg is parallel to the carrier's course, 1 mile abeam. The base leg is perpendicular to the carrier, extending aft. The final approach leg is aligned with the carrier's deck. Walsh flies the pattern, maintaining altitude and airspeed. He lowers the landing gear and flaps on the downwind leg. He slows to 110 miles per hour. This is the approach speed for the Corsair. Slower than 110, and the aircraft is too close to stalling. Faster than 110, and the arresting gear may not stop the aircraft before it reaches the end of the deck. On the base leg, Walsh looks for the LSO. The LSO is standing on his platform, paddles raised. Walsh rolls into the final turn. The LSO signals, wings level, altitude good, airspeed slightly fast. Walsh reduces throttle slightly. The airspeed drops to 112. The LSO signals, cut. Walsh cuts the throttle and the Corsair descends toward the deck. The main wheels touch. The hook contacts the deck. Walsh feels the jolt of contact, but not the deceleration of a wire catch. The hook has skipped. The Corsair is still rolling. Walsh immediately advances the throttle for a go-around. The engine hesitates. This is the characteristic lag of a radial engine when the throttle is advanced abruptly from idle. The hesitation lasts 2 seconds. In 2 seconds, the Corsair travels 300 feet. The engine comes to full power, but the aircraft is now too far down the deck to fly off. The airspeed is 80 miles per hour. The Corsair needs 90 miles per hour to fly. Walsh is out of options. He pulls the throttle back to idle and applies the brakes. The Corsair decelerates, but not quickly enough. Ahead, the deck crew is scattering. Men are running to the port side, diving behind parked aircraft, jumping over tie-down chains. Walsh can see the parked aircraft clearly now. 15 aircraft in 3 rows. The nearest is a Hellcat, tail toward him. If he hits the Hellcat's tail, his propeller will disintegrate. Propeller fragments will kill anyone nearby. The Hellcat will be pushed into the aircraft ahead of it. The impact will rupture fuel tanks. Fuel will ignite. The fire will spread to the other parked aircraft. The forward deck will become an inferno. Walsh makes a decision. He cannot stop. He cannot avoid the parked aircraft. But he can choose where to hit. The Hellcat's tail is the worst option. The fuselage is a better option. If he can hit the fuselage near the wing root, his Corsair's wing might pass under the Hellcat's wing. This will destroy his wing, but it might prevent his propeller from hitting anything solid. It might prevent the fire. He steers slightly left. The Corsair's left wing dips. The wingtip is now aimed at the Hellcat's fuselage. The distance closes. 50 feet. 30. Walsh braces. The impact is not what he expects. The Corsair's left wingtip strikes the Hellcat's fuselage just aft of the cockpit. The Corsair's wing flexes and then crumples. The impact slews the Corsair left. The nose swings toward the port side of the deck. The right main gear collapses. The Corsair drops onto its right wing and belly. The momentum carries it forward, grinding along the deck. The propeller strikes the deck and shatters. Fragments spray forward and to the sides. The engine mount buckles. The fuselage twists. The Corsair slides into the second row of parked aircraft, a TBM Avenger. The Corsair's tail contacts the Avenger's main gear. The impact stops the Corsair's forward motion, but transfers the energy to the Avenger. The Avenger rocks on its gear and then tips forward onto its nose. The Avenger's propeller strikes the deck and bends. The Avenger settles back onto its gear. The Corsair is stationary. Walsh sits in the cockpit, still strapped in, and assesses. He is not injured. The cockpit is intact. The canopy is not jammed. He can smell fuel, but he does not see fire. He releases his harness and climbs out through the canopy. He jumps down onto the deck. His legs are steady. The deck crew is already responding. Fire crews are running forward with hoses. Crash crews are checking the wreckage. The flight deck officer is waving his arms, directing men to push the damaged aircraft to the side. Walsh walks aft, away from the wreckage. He is met by the air boss, the officer responsible for flight deck operations. The air boss looks at him and says, "What happened?" Walsh says, "Hook skipped. Engine hesitated on the go-around. Couldn't stop." The air boss nods. He has seen this before. He says, "Anyone hurt?" Walsh says, "I don't know." The air boss turns to a nearby sailor and says, "Check for injuries." The sailor runs forward. Walsh stands on the deck and watches the fire crews foam the wreckage. The foam is white and thick. It covers the Corsair and the Hellcat. The smell of fuel is strong, but there is no fire. The fuel has not ignited. Walsh does not understand why. Fuel and sparks should produce fire. There were sparks. There was fuel. But there is no fire. The sailor returns and reports to the air boss. "No injuries, sir. Deck crew got clear in time." The air boss looks at Walsh and says, "You're lucky." Walsh does not respond. Luck is not something he can quantify. He followed procedure. The procedure did not work. He adapted. The adaptation prevented fatalities. Whether this constitutes luck or competence is not clear. The air boss says, "Go to the ready room. We'll debrief after we clear the deck." Walsh walks aft to the island superstructure and climbs down the ladder to the ready room. The ready room is where pilots wait between missions. It contains rows of chairs, a plotting board, and a telephone. Walsh sits in a chair and waits. His hands are shaking. This is adrenaline, not fear. The distinction is physiological. Adrenaline causes tremors. Fear causes paralysis. Walsh is not paralyzed. He is simply waiting. The debriefing occurs 30 minutes later. The air boss, the squadron commander, and the ship's operations officer are present. They ask Walsh to describe the sequence of events. Walsh describes the approach, the hook skip, the engine hesitation, the decision to steer into the Hellcat's fuselage. The operations officer asks, "Why did you steer into the Hellcat instead of trying to steer between the aircraft?" Walsh says, "There was no space between the aircraft. The rows are tight. If I steered between them, I would have hit 2 aircraft instead of 1. Hitting 1 aircraft square seemed like it would dissipate more energy." The operations officer considers this. He says, "That's correct. You made the right decision." The squadron commander asks, "Did you see any indication that the hook was going to skip before you touched down?" Walsh says, "No." The approach felt normal. The squadron commander writes this down. He says, "The hook on that aircraft has been problematic. We've had 3 skip incidents in the last month. Maintenance has been trying to adjust the rigging." The air boss says, "The aircraft is a write-off. The fuselage is twisted, the engine mount is cracked, the wing is destroyed. We'll push it over the side." This is standard procedure for damaged aircraft that cannot be repaired aboard ship. Carriers do not have the facilities for major structural repairs. Damaged aircraft are stripped of useful parts and then pushed overboard to clear deck space. Bureau number 8231 will go into the ocean. The Navy will record the loss in the squadron's logs. The notation will read, F4U1D, Bureau 8231 destroyed in deck crash. Pilot unhurt. No other casualties. Walsh is medically examined by the flight surgeon. The examination is routine, checked for concussion, checked for fractures, checked for internal injuries. The flight surgeon finds nothing. Walsh is cleared to return to flight status. The squadron commander tells him he will not fly again today. Walsh accepts this. He does not argue. The damaged Hellcat is inspected by the maintenance crew. The fuselage is dented, but the structure is intact. The dent is in a non-critical area. The Hellcat can be repaired aboard ship. The maintenance crew will replace the damaged fuselage panel and inspect the internal structure for cracks. The repair will take 3 days. The Hellcat will return to operational status. The Avenger that tipped onto its nose is inspected. The propeller is bent, but the engine is undamaged. The propeller will be replaced. The Avenger will return to operational status the next day. No personnel are injured. The deck crew scattered in time. The closest man to the impact was 15 feet away. He was behind a tie-down point, crouched with his arms over his head. He hears the crash and feels the vibration through the deck, but he is not hit by debris. When the crash crews arrive, he stands up and resumes his duties. His name is not recorded in any report. He is one of 300 men working on the flight deck that day. His survival is routine. The question of why the fuel did not ignite is addressed in the post-accident investigation. The investigation determines that the Corsair's fuel tanks did not rupture. The impact crumpled the wing structure but did not breach the tanks. Fuel was spilled during the slide, but the quantity was small, less than 10 gallons. The fuel pooled on the deck but did not reach an ignition source. The propeller fragments were metal, not burning. The friction of the aircraft sliding on the deck generated heat, but not enough to ignite fuel. The fire did not start because there was no ignition source at the moment the fuel was present. This is luck. If the propeller had struck 1 second later, after the fuel pooled, the friction spark might have ignited it. If the Hellcat's fuel tank had been full, instead of half empty, the impact might have ruptured it. If the wind had been stronger, the fuel vapor might have drifted to an ignition source. All of these variables aligned in favor of no fire. But Walsh did not know these variables at the moment of impact. He made the decision to steer into the Hellcat based on the information available. He was going to hit something. Hitting one aircraft was better than hitting multiple aircraft. Hitting the fuselage was better than hitting the tail. The decision was correct regardless of the outcome. If the fuel had ignited, the decision would still have been correct because it minimized the number of aircraft involved. The absence of fire does not validate the decision. The logic validates the decision. The Navy's investigation into the Corsair's arresting hook problem continues. The incident aboard Essex is added to the data. Engineers examine the hook attachment design and identify the problem. The hook point is too close to the tail wheel. When the tail wheel strut compresses, the hook point rises by 3 inches. 3 inches is enough to skip over a wire if the timing is wrong. The solution is to redesign the hook attachment to move the pivot point forward. This keeps the hook point at a consistent height regardless of tailwheel compression. The modification is implemented fleet-wide in January of 1945. After the modification, the Corsair's landing accident rate drops from 14% to 6%. This is still higher than the Hellcat's 3%, but it is acceptable. The Navy begins deploying Corsairs to fleet carriers in February of 1945. By the end of the war, Corsairs are operating routinely from carriers in the Pacific. The accident rate continues to decline as pilots gain experience. By August of 1945, the rate is 4%, comparable to other carrier aircraft. Walsh returns to flight status on November 6th. He flies a familiarization flight in a Hellcat. The flight is routine. He lands without incident. On November 9th, he flies a combat mission, a strike against Japanese positions on Luzon. He encounters no enemy aircraft. He drops his bombs on target and returns to the carrier. The landing is routine. He flies 23 more combat missions before the end of the war. He is never involved in another landing accident. He is awarded the Navy Commendation Medal in December of 1944. The citation reads, "For meritorious service in connection with operations against the enemy on 4 November 1944. When faced with an imminent deck crash involving multiple aircraft and personnel, Ensign Walsh demonstrated exceptional airmanship and judgment by maneuvering his aircraft to minimize damage and prevent casualties. His actions reflect great credit upon himself and the United States Naval Service." Walsh does not consider the award significant. He was following procedure until procedure no longer applied, and then he made the decision that seemed most likely to result in the fewest casualties. This is not meritorious. This is operational decision-making under constraints. He leaves the Navy in October of 1945. He returns to Ohio and completes his college degree. He works as a mechanical engineer for 31 years. He does not fly recreationally. When asked why, he says that he has done enough flying. This is not bitterness or trauma. It is simply a factual assessment. He has flown 847 hours in military aircraft. He has landed on a carrier 160 times. He has been catapulted 161 times. He has dropped ordnance on enemy targets 83 times. These experiences are sufficient. He marries in 1947 and has 3 children. He attends Navy reunions occasionally but does not discuss his service in detail. When his children ask what he did in the war, he says he flew airplanes off a ship. When they ask if it was dangerous, he says it was, but that most of the danger came from the mechanics of the operation rather than from the enemy. When they ask if he was ever scared, he says fear was not useful and that he focused on procedure instead. This answer does not satisfy his children, but it is the accurate answer. He dies in 2007 at the age of 84. His obituary mentions his naval service and his Navy Commendation Medal. It does not mention the incident on November 4th. By then, the details are recorded only in the deck logs of USS Essex and in the Bureau of Aeronautics Accident Investigation files. The logs are stored at the National Archives. Researchers can access them by requesting Record Group 38, Records of the Chief of Naval Operations. Most researchers do not request these records. The incident is not historically significant. It did not change the outcome of the war. It changed only the procedure for arresting hook attachment, but the procedure mattered. The modified hook design prevented an estimated 126 landing accidents between January and August of 1945. Each prevented accident represents 1 aircraft not destroyed, 1 pilot not injured or killed, 1 deck crew not exposed to fire. The numbers are small in the context of a war involving millions of personnel, but the numbers are not zero. Walsh's decision to steer into the Hellcat mattered to the 15 men working on the forward deck on November 4, 1944. If he had not steered, if he had simply allowed the Corsair to crash wherever momentum carried it, the impact would have been distributed across multiple aircraft. The fire would have been larger. The deck crew would have had less warning. Some of them would not have escaped, but Walsh steered. The impact was concentrated. The fire did not start. The crew escaped. These men continued their duties. They recovered aircraft, rearmed aircraft, refueled aircraft. They did their jobs for the remainder of the war. Some of them survived. Some of them did not. Their survival on November 4th did not guarantee their survival on other days, but it gave them other days. This is what procedural decision-making provides. It does not guarantee outcomes. It optimizes probabilities. Walsh could not guarantee that steering into the Hellcat would prevent a fire. He could only calculate that hitting 1 aircraft was probabilistically better than hitting 3. The calculation was correct. The outcome aligned with the calculation. This is not luck. This is mathematics. The carrier deck is an environment where mathematics is unforgiving. The deck is 872 feet long and 147 feet wide. An aircraft landing at 110 miles per hour travels 161 feet per second. If the arresting hook misses all 9 wires, the aircraft has 5 seconds of deck remaining. In 5 seconds, a pilot must decide, go around, or crash in a controlled manner. If the engine hesitates, the decision is made for him. He will crash. The only choice is where. Walsh chose where. He aimed for the space that would dissipate the most energy in the first impact. The wing absorbed the impact. The fuselage twisted but did not rupture. The fuel tanks did not breach. The propeller shattered, but the fragments did not strike personnel. The second impact, with the Avenger, stopped the forward motion. The Corsair came to rest. The outcome was optimal, given the constraints. This is what carrier aviation teaches. The constraints are absolute. The deck is finite. The fuel is finite. The airspeed is finite. Within these constraints, decisions must be made continuously. Each decision affects the next. A pilot who makes correct decisions consistently survives longer than a pilot who makes incorrect decisions. Correctness is not measured by outcomes. Outcomes involve variables the pilot cannot control. Correctness is measured by logic. Did the pilot choose the option with the highest probability of success given the information available? Walsh chose correctly. The information available was hook skipped, engine hesitated, aircraft is not stopping, 15 aircraft ahead, deck crew present. The options were steer left into one aircraft, steer right into one aircraft, continue straight into 3 aircraft. The correct option was to steer into 1 aircraft. Walsh steered left because the Hellcat on the left was slightly farther forward than the aircraft on the right, which meant a fraction of a second more time to decelerate before impact. This fraction of a second might reduce the impact speed by 5 miles per hour. 5 miles per hour might be the difference between a fuel tank rupture and a fuel tank intact. The calculation is precise. The outcome is uncertain. Walsh made the calculation. The outcome aligned. Thousands of other pilots made similar calculations, and the outcomes did not align. They crashed and died. They did not die because they calculated incorrectly. They died because the variables did not align. The engine failed completely instead of hesitating. The fuel tank ruptured instead of remaining intact. The deck crew was 2 steps slower. The fire started instead of not starting. Walsh's variables aligned. He survived. The deck crew survived. The operation continued. USS Essex launched and recovered aircraft for the remainder of the day. The following day, flight operations resumed normal tempo. The war continued. The incident was recorded and filed. It did not disrupt the operational tempo because carrier operations account for incidents. Aircraft are damaged. Pilots are injured. Deck crews are endangered. These are known variables. The system is designed with redundancy to absorb these variables. But the individuals involved do not experience the incident as a variable in a system. They experience it as 3 seconds of controlled catastrophe. Walsh experienced the decision, steer or don't steer. The deck crew experienced the scatter, run, or be crushed. The LSO experienced the failure. The hook skipped, and there was nothing he could do. Each of these experiences is distinct and immediate. The system abstracts them into data. The data is analyzed. The procedure is modified. The next incident is less likely. This is the function of procedure. It converts individual experience into collective knowledge. Walsh's experience becomes data. The data reveals that the hook attachment is flawed. The attachment is redesigned. Future pilots do not experience what Walsh experienced because the hook no longer skips. The procedure has been modified. The system has learned. But Walsh did not crash to teach the system. He crashed because the system failed. His contribution is not the crash. His contribution is the decision to minimize the damage when the crash became inevitable. This decision was not procedural because there is no procedure for where to aim a crashing aircraft. There is only judgment. Walsh's judgment was sound. The outcome validated the judgment. The Navy recognized this with a commendation. The commendation is accurate but incomplete. It recognizes the decision but not the context. The context is that Walsh had 3 seconds to calculate probabilities and execute a maneuver while his aircraft was out of control. 3 seconds is not enough time to think. It is only enough time to act on training and instinct. Walsh's training taught him how to recover from a hook skip. The procedure is, apply full power, go around, try again. Walsh applied the procedure. The procedure failed because the engine hesitated. At that moment, training ended and judgment began. Judgment is what remains when training is insufficient. Walsh's judgment was to steer into the collision rather than allow the collision to occur randomly. This judgment saved lives. The Navy commended him. He did not consider the commendation significant. This is common among men who survive incidents that should have been fatal. They do not interpret their survival as exceptional. They interpret it as the outcome of a series of decisions made under constraints. The constraints were severe. The decisions were correct. The outcome was survival. This is not heroism. This is competence. The distinction matters because heroism implies choice in favorable circumstances. Competence implies correct action in unfavorable circumstances. Walsh did not choose to have his hook skip. He did not choose to have his engine hesitate. He did not choose to crash. He chose only where to crash. The choice was constrained by physics, by geometry, by time. Within these constraints, he chose correctly. This is competence. The deck of USS Essex in November of 1944 is not a place for heroes. It is a place for competent men executing procedures under constraints. When the procedures fail, the men adapt. When adaptation is not possible, they minimize damage. This is the standard. Walsh met the standard. He was commended because the outcome was particularly favorable. But meeting the standard is not exceptional. It is expected. Thousands of men met the standard during the war. Most of them are not remembered. Their decisions are recorded in deck logs and accident reports and maintenance records. The records are filed. The men return to civilian life. They do not discuss their service except in factual terms. They do not consider themselves exceptional. They were simply doing their jobs under difficult conditions. The conditions were often fatal. The men who survived were competent and lucky. The men who did not survive were competent and unlucky. The difference was not in the quality of the men. The difference was in the variables. Walsh understood this. He knew that his survival on November 4th was the result of correct decisions and favorable variables. He knew that correct decisions do not always produce favorable outcomes. He knew that other pilots made the same decisions and died. He did not consider himself special. He considered himself fortunate. The sky over the Philippine Sea is the same now as it was in 1944. The water is the same color. The distance from sea level to 800 feet is the same. The physics of a carrier landing are unchanged. What has changed is the technology. Modern carriers have angled decks, which allow an aircraft that misses the wires to take off again without hitting parked aircraft. Modern arresting gear has multiple redundant systems. Modern engines respond instantly to throttle inputs. The variables have been controlled. The accidents have been reduced, but they have not been eliminated. Carrier aviation remains unforgiving. The deck is still finite. The fuel is still finite. The decisions are still made in seconds. Pilots still crash. The crashes are less frequent, but they still occur. The difference is that the procedures have been refined by the accumulated experience of men like Walsh. Each incident is analyzed. Each procedure is modified. The system learns. The pilots benefit. Walsh's contribution to this system is one incident, one decision, one outcome. The contribution is small, but the system is built from small contributions. Each incident adds data. Each data point refines the procedure. The procedure reduces the frequency of the next incident. This is progress. It is not dramatic. It is incremental, but it is real. The carrier deck where Walsh crashed no longer exists. USS Essex was decommissioned in 1947, recommissioned in 1951 for the Korean War, and finally decommissioned in 1969. The ship was scrapped in 1975. The steel was melted down and repurposed. The deck where 15 men scattered and where Walsh steered his Corsair into a Hellcat is now part of bridges or buildings or cars. The physical space is gone. The event remains only in records. But the event mattered. It mattered to Walsh, who survived. It mattered to the 15 men on the deck who survived. It mattered to the engineers who redesigned the arresting hook. It mattered to the pilots who flew Corsairs after January of 1945 and whose hooks did not skip. The chain of consequence is long and diffuse, but it is unbroken. This is what history preserves. Not the heroic narratives, but the procedural decisions. Not the exceptional men, but the competent ones. Not the dramatic outcomes, but the incremental improvements. Walsh did his job. The system recorded it. The procedure improved. Other men benefited. This is enough.